Their voices poured through the house like cold water down the spine. Sharp, careless, excited in that way people sound only when talking about things they believe already belong to them. The funeral roses hadn't even wilted yet. Their scent still clung to my sleeves as I walked down the stairs, hand-brushing the banister my husband used to polish every Sunday, as if even wood deserved more tenderness than a wife. "Check her pulse while we read the will," someone laughed from the living room. A ripple of amusement followed, the kind that comes easily to people who have forgotten you're still breathing. I paused at the last step, not because my body had grown fragile, but because my heart had. Grief is heavy in the bones, especially when it comes wrapped in betrayal. The estate, once my sanctuary, now felt like a showroom for vultures. My grandson slapped a neon sticker onto the grandfather clock, the one his grandfather restored by hand the year our son left for college. "This one's mine," he announced proudly, as if he'd built anything more than a sense of entitlement. His sister stood nearby, scanning the walls with some home renovation app. "Well, got all this once she's gone. Maybe a spa room," she mused, already redesigning my life while I stood in it. Not one of them paused to say hello. Not one offered a chair. They simply moved around me like I was a pillar in the way. My daughter-in-law appeared with a tray of champagne flutes. "To Harold's legacy," she declared. "To our future," someone added. "To clearing out the ghosts," another laughed. A ghost. That's what I had become to them. A folding chair scraped across the tile. "You can sit in the mudroom, Mom," my son said, not even looking at me. "Quieter there." I walked slowly toward the small room, where we used to store gardening gloves and winter coats. A plate of dried chicken and potatoes was set on a crate. My dinner. They stayed in the dining room where my chair had already been replaced with a wobbling metal one, as if even furniture needed upgrading, now that I was alone. From the next room came their voices, unfiltered. "This house smells like old paper and death. She'll be gone in months. Can we keep her pension if we forward her mail? She built soup. Dad built an empire. It was remarkable, really, the volume at which people speak when they are confident the target of their cruelty won't fight back." I sipped my lukewarm tea with both hands to keep them from trembling. Their laughter bounced down the hallway, knocking into memories I once held proudly. My grandson popped his head into the mudroom, startled that I was still sitting upright. "There's bottled water in the garage fridge," he said, tone flat. He didn't wait for an answer. I swallowed the last cold bite of chicken and quietly reached into the pocket of my cardigan. The edges of the old document were still crisp, even after 15 years. A bank memorandum with my name inked in blue. My contribution. My sacrifice. The money that saved the company when no one else could. They never knew. I want to. They never asked. Back then, when the business teetered at the edge of collapse, I had sold every heirloom my mother gave me. The emerald necklace she wore on her wedding day, the gold bangles from my bridal chest, the brooch I saved for our anniversary dinner. Quietly, secretly, I wired the money and whispered to my husband, "Use this, but never tell them where it came from." He never did. Until now. Until now. Upstairs, drawers slammed open. Suitcases rolled. Someone cheered about claiming the master bedroom. Another laughed about painting it pink. My life was being peeled apart like wallpaper. No one liked anymore. But beneath all the noise, I felt something steady inside me. Not anger. Not shock. A pulse. A heartbeat they assumed had already gone still. I rose from the folding chair, my knees aching, my hand gripping the edge of the sink to steady myself. I glanced out the small window at the roses along the driveway. Rose is my husband, planted for my 60th birthday, now wilting from neglect. No one had watered them, just like no one watered me. But roses bloom again. Hey, how? So do women. Hi. I stepped out of the mudroom and into the hall where my family circled like greedy shadows. None of them noticed me. Not the ghost they believed I was. I touched the document in my pocket. The one that tied me to the trust, to the company, to the legacy they had declared theirs. Let them laugh. Let them drink. The will reading was coming. And they had no idea how alive I still was. But what none of them knew, not even the ones already choosing paint colors for my bedroom, was that the real inheritance, the one that would flip their world upside down, was about to rise from the silence they forced me into. The next morning, the house buzzed with even more noise. Footsteps thudding across the upstairs landing. Cabinet doors slamming. The sound of tape ripping as they marked more items they believed already belonged to them. If greed had a soundtrack, this house was playing it on full volume. I sat quietly at the edge of the laundry room cot. My new bedroom, as they called it. And wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. The laundry room smelled of detergent and damp concrete. The kind of scent that clings to forgotten corners. Empty detergent bottles lined the shelf where my framed photographs used to hang upstairs. My life had been traded, item by item, for convenience. Through the thin wall, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, bright and brittle like cracked porcelain. She doesn't need a big room. The cot is enough. She should be grateful we're even managing her at this age. Managing me, as if I were a task on a list. Then came Joseph's voice. My son, steady, impatient, dismissive in a way I still wasn't used to hearing. We just have to get through the will reading. After that, everything becomes simpler. Simpler, dit And der Trauen, Trauen, Terror. Kapseln. Kaps Hogo. For whom? He used to run to me when he scraped his knees, crying into my blouse, until the fabric soaked through. He used to beg me to stay in his room during storms because the thunder shook the walls. What a strange thing. To raise someone from the ground up only to be told later, you're too heavy to keep around. My fingers brushed the edge of the leather-bound folder beneath the cot. The documents inside, the trust papers, the investment records, the proposal drafts, were unexpectedly heavy, as though they carried not just ink, but years of swallowed truths. I thought back to the night everything changed. 15 years ago, when my husband's company had been hanging by a thread. I remembered the look on his face when he came home. Exhausted eyes, a half-trembling hand, a silence so thick I felt it before he spoke. He didn't need to say it. I knew. The bank had threatened foreclosure. I had stood by the bedroom window after he fell asleep, staring out at the moonlit yard, and made a decision no one but me would ever carry the weight. I opened the drawer where I kept my mother's jewelry. The emerald pendant she wore on her wedding day. My gold bridal bangles. The heirloom brooch that had survived 2 generations of women. They weren't just ornaments. Whoa. They were memory, history, identity. And I sold them. Every piece. By morning, the money was in the company's account. He never asked how the funds appeared. He only thanked me. And then, he let the world believe he had single-handedly saved the empire. I never complained. Wives of my generation didn't. We were trained to be quiet pillars. Strong enough to carry the home. Silent enough to make it seem effortless. But silence stores things, and everything stored eventually demands air. As I sat on the cot, a shadow darkened the doorway. Clarissa stood there, my daughter-in-law. She carried a stack of folded towels and a bottle of unscented shampoo. The kind hotels give out when they've run out of the good ones. "These are for you," she said, setting them on a crate. "Dinner will be at 7. You can eat after we're done." I nodded politely, though something inside me tightened. After they're done. Like a stray cat fed after the family. When she left, I waited for the house to quiet. Then I slipped a leather folder into my bag and stepped out the back door. The cold morning air stung my cheeks, but it felt good to breathe something that wasn't heavy with expectation. The walk to the pharmacy payphone was short. The pavement was cracked, the December wind sharp, but I moved with purpose. They had cut off my cell service by accident, or so they claimed. Maybe they expected that would keep me still. But they had forgotten something important. I had lived a life long before them. And I still remembered how to move without permission. When the payphone connected, I dialed the number I had memorized years ago. Mr. Alden answered on the second ring. "It's time," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. "Come in tomorrow," he replied. The next afternoon, his office smelled of polished wood and lemon oil. I laid out each document one by one. The ones tying me to the trust. The ones documenting my investment. The drafts of the proposal with my slanted handwriting still on them. The patent filings. Under my old pseudonym. He read every page with the quiet concentration of someone who knows a storm when he sees one forming. When he finally looked up, he asked, "Do you understand what this means?" I nodded. "I don't want revenge," I said softly. "I just want the truth to breathe." And for the first time in years, I felt something inside me straighten. A spine I thought had gone soft from age and patience, rising upright again. But while I prepared the truth, my family prepared a celebration. Completely unaware that the woman they banished to a laundry room was about to rewrite the entire script of their future. The morning of the will, Reading arrived with a sky. The color of pewter, heavy, gray, and impatient. The kind of weather that makes you feel as if even the clouds want to witness something dramatic. I dressed slowly, choosing the beige coat I'd mopped last Christmas for being too plain. As if a woman my age had nothing left to dress up for. Let them underestimate the plain things. Plain things last the longest. The car ride with Joseph and his wife was quiet, though not out of respect. They were too busy imagining the outcome. I could see it in the gleam of Joseph's eyes, the way he gripped the steering wheel, not with grief, but with anticipation. His wife scrolled through listings on her phone. Beach properties in Monterey are going up, she murmured, showing him the screen. If we get a large enough share, we should buy immediately. He nodded, barely hiding the smile tugging at his lip. No more waiting. No more dealing with everything at home. I knew what everything meant. It meant me. I looked out the window at the passing trees. Once, I taught my son the names of all of the birds that perched on branches along this very road. Now he didn't remember the birds, or the branches, or me. When we stepped into the lawyer's building, tall glass panels, marble floors, cold air conditioning, I felt more like a spectator than a participant. They ushered me to a folding chair at the end of the long table, far away from the center, where Joseph and the others sat like eager shareholders waiting for profit margins. Catherine, my granddaughter, barely glanced up from her phone. My grandson practiced his signature on a legal pad, likely imagining how it would look on property deeds. None of them spoke to me. None of them expected me to speak. Mr. Alden entered with the quiet authority of a man accustomed to ending arguments simply by breathing. He set his briefcase on the polished table, adjusted his glasses, and cleared his throat. Thank you all for coming. Today we'll execute the final wishes of Mr. Harold Brightwood. No one noticed the faint emphasis on the words, final wishes. He reached into his case and slowly lifted a small silver recorder. A hush fell across the room. It'll begin with an audio statement from Mr. Brightwood himself, recorded 3 weeks before his passing. He pressed play. My husband's voice, softer than I remembered, older but unmistakable, filled the room. If my son ever speaks ill of his mother, he said, deduct $1 million per word. The silence that followed was not polite. It was stunned, sharp, dirty, cold, punishment. Tall. Joseph bolted upright in his chair. What is this? Dad never... But Mr. Alden raised a single hand. There is more. He opened a folder marked Exhibit A and passed out printed transcripts stamped with the verification seal of the home security system. Statements recorded in the kitchen 3 days after the funeral, he explained. He began reading. She's still breathing. Thought she'd be gone by now. Check her pulse at the will reading. She built soup. He built an empire. She's half dead already. Line after line. Word after word. Each one was another nail sealing Joseph's inheritance shut. Mr. Alden flipped to the final page. A total of 88 recorded statements. Accordingly, $88 million deducted from Mr. Joseph Brightwood's share. Gasps down. A pen hit the table. Someone swore under their breath. And Mr. Alden continued calmly, an additional $3.9 million deducted as discretionary penalty per clause 14C. Joseph's wife choked on air. You can't be serious. This is a joke. It has to be. She looked at Joseph, who sat frozen, face as pale as the marble beneath his feet. What's left? He whispered. Mr. Alden checked the final page. 3,800. The number fell into the room like a stone through glass. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I simply breathed. For the first time in years, my breath felt like it belonged to me. Mr. Alden closed the folder with deliberate finality. Now, he said, turning toward me, we continue. He picked up a second folder, trimmed in gold. As per Mr. Brightwood's revised will, the primary beneficiary of the estate, trust, patents, securities portfolio, and all intellectual property rights. He looked directly at me. Is his wife, Eleanor Brightwood. My name. The name they had treated like an inconvenience echoed through the room, with a weight none of them saw coming. He handed the folder to me. I felt the thickness of the documents inside. Deeds, transfers, titles, certifications, accounts. Each one a testament to years I had spent unseen. Catherine dropped her phone. My grandson whispered, No way. Joseph stared, empty-handed, the reality sinking in like ice water. I stood. Not quickly. Andan, Tiwarin Choundise. Shewonissel. Not dramatically, just steadily, as a woman who had been bent but not broken. They had buried me in assumptions. They forgot I was still thinking. But they still hadn't seen the final blow. Because the truth I was about to reveal next would not only reshape the inheritance, it would expose the brilliance they spent years pretending I never had. The air in the room shifted after my name was spoken. It wasn't loud, but it was immediate. A collective tightening of shoulders, a sharp inhale masked behind folded hands, a quiet disbelief settling like dust over polished wood. But Mr. Alden wasn't finished. Not even close. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a red wax stamp. The seal bore a familiar crest, the emblem Harold used for documents he considered too important for ordinary paper. Joseph's wife leaned forward, whispering frantically, This must be a mistake. Harold would never... But even she didn't sound convinced. Mr. Alden gently placed the sealed envelope on the table, then unfolded another set of documents. Before his passing, Mr. Brightwood requested a full review of the intellectual property surrounding the company's IPO era, specifically the strategy proposal submitted under the pseudonym E.B. Sinclair. At the mention of that name, the pseudonym I had chosen years ago, writing in the quiet hours while everyone slept. My pulse hammered in my ears. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The truth could walk on its own now. Joseph frowned, confused. Dad created that. Everyone knows he. No, Mr. Alden interrupted softly. Everyone assumed he did. He turned the first page toward the group. It was a certification document from the Federal Intellectual Property Office. Handwriting, analysis, ink verification. Question, verification. Postal timestamp. Location of mailing. All of it traced back to one person. Me. The room went painfully still. Catherine, who had spent the last hour scrolling on her phone, actually lifted her face, eyes widening as the reality dawned. This was her, she whispered. Mr. Alden nodded. Yes, your grandmother authored the original stabilization model, the one credited with rescuing Brightwood Industries from bankruptcy. Joseph's mouth fell open, not in anger at first, but in disbelief. She made dinner. She wasn't in the boardroom. She didn't. She did, Mr. Alden said firmly. And for the record, she did far more than any boardroom ever acknowledged. He pulled out a second document. This one older. The paper slightly yellowed, the edges smoothed from years of handling. This is Harold Brightwood's signed letter, unlocking the sealed testimony he left behind. He broke the wax seal and opened it slowly. I braced myself. Even after everything, I wasn't sure what Harold had written. We had kept so many secrets in the name of protecting one another. Some truths, even good ones, carry a sting. Mr. Alden began to read. To my family, there is a story you were never told. And that is my failing, not hers. When I was drowning in the early years of the company, it was not brilliance that saved me. It was your mother. And she sold her heirlooms to keep our doors open. She wrote the expansion model you all praise me for. She carried the weight I claimed publicly and the burden I kept private. She's the architect of everything you stand to inherit. Harold Brightwood. A tremor ran through the room. Joseph shook his head, more to himself than anyone else. No. Dad would have told me if that were true. I finally spoke. He didn't tell you, I said quietly. Because I asked him not to. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Years of silence had sharpened it, not softened it. Joseph turned toward me, eyes clouded with confusion, and something else. Something dangerously close to shame. Why? He demanded. Why would you hide something like that? I smiled gently. A smile shaped by decades of motherhood. Because sometimes children need to grow without knowing the scaffolding holding them up. He looked away. Mr. Alden cleared his throat again and continued. There is one more matter to address. He lifted the final sheet. A summary of the royalty, earnings tied to the original patent. $9 million annually. Untouched. Accruing for years. All held in a trust under my name. Joseph's wife gasped. That kind of money? Why didn't we? I cut her off with a calm, steady voice. Because it wasn't yours. Even the glass walls seemed to echo the words. Mr. Alden closed the final folder with a soft snap. The sound of a long, hidden truth locking into place. I stood up slowly, adjusting my beige coat. The same coat they once said made me look tired. Funny how the same woman can appear invisible one day and unstoppable the next, and never change her coat at all. As I walked toward the door, no one stopped me. No one dared. Not because they feared me, but because for the first time, they saw me. Not as an old woman in a laundry room. Not as a burden. Wow. Not as the ghost in the house, but as the mind that had built the foundation beneath their entire lives. I reached the doorway and paused. The silence behind me was louder than any apology. Yet, even as they sat frozen in the wake of the truth, they still didn't know what was coming next, because the inheritance wasn't the only thing about to change. The house, their future, and every plan they'd made were about to crumble in ways they never imagined. For 2 days after the will reading, the house moved with a strange rhythm. Not the joyful, chaotic rhythm of family, but the frantic rustling of people packing their illusions into cardboard boxes. They weren't talking loudly anymore. Whispers replaced laughter. Soft thuds replaced bragging. Well, a quiet panic replaced entitlement. I walked through the halls like a guest in my own home, but a guest who no longer needed permission to open any door. The neon stickers that once screamed "This one's mine" now hung like embarrassing reminders of greed. Someone tried too hard to hide. Most of them had curled at the corners and were peeling off the furniture on their own. Even the house was rejecting them. In the kitchen, Joseph sat at the table. The same table where I'd set birthday cakes, cooled pies, and folded tiny shirts once stained with his childhood adventures. Now his shoulders were hunched, his hands buried in his hair, as if the weight of the truth had finally settled where arrogance once sat. He didn't notice me at first. Not until I gently touched the back of the chair across from him. He looked up. His eyes were red. Not from anger this time, but from the kind of exhaustion that comes only when a man has finally run out of excuses. "Mom," he whispered. Just one syllable, but it carried years. I sat, not out of obligation, but out of choice. A choice I regained the moment my name was spoken aloud at the reading. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't know any of it, Dad. He never told me." I nodded slowly. "You never asked." The truth didn't come out sharp or spiteful. It came out gentle, tired, like something that had been carried for too long. His cheeks flushed with shame. "All those times," he murmured. "I thought you were fading. I thought you couldn't keep up with things anymore." I gave him a small smile. "I wasn't fading, Joseph. You were simply looking elsewhere." Silence settled between us. But this silence wasn't cruel. It was a moment of recognition, a truth finally allowed to sit at the table. He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The words, fragile and late, but real. Before I could respond, Clarissa's voice pierced the moment from the hallway. We need to finish packing. They gave us a deadline. Her shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, a rhythm I had grown to associate with criticism. She entered the kitchen and stopped short at the sight of me. Her expression tightened, as if apologies were beneath her vocabulary. "We'll be out soon," she said curtly, plastering on a brittle smile. I simply nodded. I wasn't angry. I wasn't gloating. I had simply stopped caring to make her comfortable. They finished packing by mid-afternoon. Catherine came down last, dragging a suitcase that was heavier than her regret. She didn't speak, but she paused at the doorway, her eyes uncertain. "Grandma?" she whispered. "Yes." She held out something. A crumpled drawing she'd pulled from a box. A stick figure me standing beside a giant light bulb drawn by her little brother years ago. I had taped it to the fridge back then. They'd thrown it in a donation box hours earlier. "I didn't know," she said, voice trembling. "No one told us you were." I laughed softly. "Smart, useful, alive?" "Alive?" She nodded, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry." I touched her cheek briefly. "I know, dear. And someday be sure to tell your daughters that a quiet woman is never a powerless one." When the last car pulled out of the driveway, the house exhaled. Truly exhaled. The rooms seemed taller, the windows brighter, the floors steadier, as if years of footsteps that treated it like a trophy had left bruises it could finally heal. I walked to the laundry room, my forced bedroom, and opened a small closet. A single crate remained, filled with wrinkled sheets, an old mop, and the broken broom they never repaired. I smiled as I shut the door. That room would not belong to loneliness again. After a long moment, I went to the back porch. The wind was soft, almost comforting, carrying the scent of the pomegranate tree. I knelt beside the small, forgotten rose bush I'd watered days before, the one that had struggled under neglect. Green tips now peeked shyly from its stem. Life returning, even after cruelty. I whispered, "We bloom again, little one Deutsch." As I stood, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. The house had been loud for too long. Loud with other people's wants, claims, and careless judgments. But now, it was finally ready to let me think out loud. I walked through each room, touching memories with my fingertips, reclaiming the spaces where I had lived, loved, built, and been forgotten. Not anymore. By evening, I called the realtor. "I'm ready," I told her. "To sell?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "To start." But selling the house was only the beginning. What came next wasn't just a new chapter. It was a reckoning, a rebirth, and a legacy rewritten by the very woman they once tried to erase. Selling the house wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of release. Some places become too heavy with echoes. Echoes of footsteps walking over you, voices diminishing you, stickers claiming life that never belonged to them. Even after they left, their words clung to the walls like dampness. I wanted light. I wanted air. I wanted a life where I no longer needed to shrink myself to fit inside someone else's comfort. The realtor arrived 3 weeks later. She was young, confident, and spoke in crisp real estate syllables. But when she stepped inside and glanced around the empty halls, she paused. "This house has a feeling," she said softly. For a moment, I almost told her everything. The laughter behind doors, the labels on my memories, the cot in the laundry room. But I simply replied, "It's time it found a family who listens." It sold in 2 days. The price didn't matter. What mattered was that I walked out of it by choice, not exile. I moved into a penthouse overlooking the sea, a place with white curtains that swayed like they were breathing, and large windows that let the ocean whisper directly into the room. There was no mudroom cot, no slamming drawers, no whispers about my pulse or my usefulness. Only peace. Peace that echoed louder than any silence forced upon me. The first morning in my new home, I set a cup of tea on the balcony railing and watched the sun break across the water. The waves didn't ask for my age or question my worth. They simply arrived, again and again, offering rhythm and renewal. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own thoughts and realized how little space they'd been given before. With the royalties still flowing and the estate now legally mine, I could have lived in luxury without ever lifting another finger. But when held by someone who has endured erasure, begins to feel like a responsibility. So I started something new. Not a company, not an empire, a foundation. I named it the Brightwood Fund for Women Who Go Unseen. The name alone made me smile. Finally, something bearing my name, not hidden behind initials or whispered contributions. The foundation wasn't flashy. It didn't need a gala. Why? It didn't need applause. It simply needed women. Women who had been silenced. Women who had been overlooked. Women whose brilliance had been folded into someone else's success. Within months, the fund began offering scholarships, innovation grants, and legal support for women fighting to have their intellectual property recognized. Letters poured in handwritten, typed, sometimes tear-stained, from women who had been told, "Your idea isn't worth anything." I read every single one, not because they needed me, but because I understood them. Every woman who had ever swallowed her genius for the comfort of others deserved someone to hear her roar. One afternoon, as I was sorting through letters, the lobby receptionist called up. "There's someone here to see you," she said awkwardly. "Ah, Joseph Brightwood? My son." I hesitated only a moment before telling her to let him up. When he entered the penthouse, he looked smaller. Not poorer, not defeated, just human. The armor of arrogance he once wore so proudly had cracked, and the man underneath looked unsure of how to approach the mother he once dismissed. "Mom," he said quietly. I gestured toward the balcony. "Tay." He nodded. We sat side by side, the ocean shimmering like a boundary. Neither of us was willing to cross too quickly. "I'm not here to ask for money," he began. "I didn't assume you were," I replied. He nodded again, relieved but trembling. "I wanted to understand," he said. "All those years. Dad's company, the decisions, the proposals. Why didn't you ever tell me?" I sipped my tea, letting the steam warm my face. "Because," I said, "I wanted to give you space to grow, not to overshadow you with the truth." He glanced down at his hands. "I should have asked. I should have seen you. You were a child," I reminded him gently. "And when you grew up, comfort made you forget." He swallowed hard. "I am sorry for the jokes, the assumptions, the things I said when I thought." He stopped, unable to finish. "When you thought I had nothing left, I finished for him." He nodded, eyes shining. I placed my hand over his. "This isn't about punishment, Joseph. It's about change. And change is still possible." He let out a trembling breath. A boy again. Not a man clawing for inheritance. We sat there until the sun dipped into the sea, neither rushing forgiveness nor forcing it. Some wounds heal slowly, but even slow healing is still healing. Before he left, he whispered, "Thank you for still being my mother." And I realized forgiveness, too, is a kind of legacy. That night, I stood at the balcony railing again. The waves were dark now, reflecting the moon like a silver thread stitched across the water. A lifetime ago, I was the invisible architect behind an empire. Then, I was the ghost of my own home. Then I was the woman resurrected by truth. Now, one. I was simply myself. A mind. A maker. A woman who refused to disappear. And somewhere out there, countless others like me were waiting for their moment to rise. Oh, final hook, ending. Because every woman they try to erase eventually remembers one thing. Brilliance doesn't fade. It waits. And when it finally steps into the light, no one can pretend not to see it.